I think I'll start my intro a minute early because we've got three speakers and they all have a lot to say. Uh, this is the nutrient session. If you're looking for the PFAS session, which is not as interesting as our session, they would, and not as definitely not as fun. They're across the hall. So this is nutrients, not PFAS. We are more fun. Um, My name's Tom Secord. I'm on the advisory board for the Center of Excellence. This is my third year being on the advisory board, and the last 2 years I've helped organize that PFAS session. This year I wanted to branch out to a different issue, something that was also near and dear to my interests. I grew up in Washington County on the banks of the Hudson River. In my childhood throughout the 80s, I read about PCBs in the Hudson River, and that was the water quality issue that got me to Clarkson. From there, I graduated, and now I actually live in Boise, Idaho. But I come back to New York frequently. We have a summer place in the Adirondacks. Um, my work is doing desalination, but coming to the Adirondacks every year for my summer vacation, I see some water quality changes in the lakes. As development occurs around some of these lakes, we're starting to see weeds in some lakes that there were no weeds before. And this topic is near and dear to my interests because it impacts us. It impacts me. So I hope you all enjoy this session. I think we've got three great speakers. Our first one is Jacob Mesh, and he's with HDR. He has a BS in civil engineering from Texas Tech and a PhD also in civil engineering from Virginia Tech. And his current work focuses on wastewater facility planning, emergency technology evaluations, and wastewater process modeling.
All right. Well, as Tom said, thank you guys for being here and choosing the right room. Uh, PFAS is a sexy topic, but so is nutrients. So I'll be talking today about a Water Research Foundation project that was led by HDR, looking at holistic approaches for nutrient removal. And oh, there we go. So just real quick agenda here. Going to be giving a project overview, talk about these 3 Ps framework that came out of the project. Then kind of how to use this as like a diagnostic tool when looking at nutrient issues in different watersheds and kind of showing this in some key watersheds. So just real quick, this project, and if you're looking for more information after my presentation, you can go on the Water Research Foundation's website and look for WRF 4974. Comes right up. You can download the final report. It's long, so this is the abbreviated version. Basically, the backbone of this project was 3 workshops. Now, in planning this, they were meant to be in-person workshops. These occurred in the spring of 2020. So if you remember that time, there were a global pandemic that kind of restricted us from in-person workshops. So they went to virtual workshops, but they were still hosted by these 3 different key watersheds. And so the first workshop was around the Bay Area, and there we're looking at the Bay Area wasn't legally impaired, but they were concerned about potential emerging nutrient issues, and so that is a really cool collaborative approach to watershed permitting to kind of get ahead of nutrient issues. Second one is centered around the Delaware River, the lower Delaware River. And this was with Philadelphia Water Department. Here, the focus was more on a DO sag and more tied to ammonia than nutrients as we think of as like nitrogen and phosphorus. And then the third one was hosted by the Iowa Soybean Association in the city of Cedar Rapids. So this was a really cool look at both point and non-point source control for nutrient removal, or nutrient management, I should say. And just a really cool collaboration between the city and agriculture in that area. So this is the kind of the 3Ps framework that kind of came out of these 3 workshops. And so the 3Ps are practices, policies, and partnerships. We're going to be going into each one of these in a little bit more detail, but practices is talking about kind of technologies, nutrient removal technologies at wastewater treatment plants, and then also best management practices for agriculture and other industries. Policy is pretty self-explanatory, right? Like regulatory frameworks and watershed governance. And then partnerships. So this is collaboration, and a key part of that collaboration is good leadership. Now, kind of hovering over this 3P framework, there are a couple things that impact all 3, right? And so you have climate change, and climate change has impacts in water quality degradation. So municipalities that are discharging to a receiving body of water, as that body of water quality, or as that water quality in that body of water degrades, it can lead to more stringent limitations for that municipality. Also, increased precipitation can lead to more sewage spills in the form of CSOs and SSOs. Also, increases in drought, flooding, wildfire, power outages that impact resiliency of wastewater treatment. And so when we think about how climate change impacts these 3Ps, we think about water temperature, algae blooms, hypoxia, kind of the technical aspects of how climate change impacts water quality for practices. For policies, we need to be mindful of balancing regulations. So CSOs, combined sewers have a harder time with higher flow treating, efficiently removing nutrient loads from wastewater. So balancing those 2 regulatory drivers. And then thinking about advanced treatment versus greenhouse gases. So wastewater treatment plants themselves are significant producers of greenhouse gases. And as you increase the stringency of nutrient removal requirements, you're also increasing the greenhouse gases that they're producing. And so we need to consider that when really cranking down limits on wastewater treatment plants. And then finally, partnerships. So looking for cross-discipline coordination and collaboration to inform how climate change impacts nutrient management on watersheds. We also recognize that environmental justice is an overarching challenge for these 3 for the 3Ps as well. So when it comes to practices, degraded water quality typically impacts disadvantaged communities. And so, we need to think about that as we're managing nutrients. Also, affordability is a big issue, right? So a lot of municipalities that have impacts on water quality can be disadvantaged communities. And so upgrading their wastewater treatment plant, putting that cost burden back on that community, we need to be mindful of that. Policies. When it comes to policies, thinking about affordability as well. And then partnerships, really focusing on community engagement and maybe aggregated funding as well. Okay, so we're going to dive into these 3Ps in a little bit more detail now. So practices, this is kind of like, if you listen to my intro, I'm a wastewater technology person, so this is kind of where my happy zone is. And we have a lot of information about how to remove nutrients from wastewater treatment plants. Here are a couple examples of previous research studies that kind of go into this in more detail. But then we're also getting really good at removing nutrients or knowing how to remove nutrients from urban stormwater and non-point sources like agricultural best management practices. And then also stream restoration and forest nutrient management. However, we have to be careful on not over relying on technology solutions. And so you really need a balance of good policy to make sensible decisions. This is like my favorite slide in this presentation, just because it's kind of funny, kind of sad. But this is a plant in Montana, and this plant is really cool. It's an advanced nutrient removal plant. Has a really cool process. They spend a lot of money on it. Has a lot of greenhouse gas emissions associated with it as well. And then you can see it discharges into Ashley Creek, and then 600 feet down from their discharge downstream, there's a cow adding some of those nutrients right back into the stream, right? And so this just really shows how a balance of these P's is really needed to address nutrient management in a sensible solution. And when we think about policies that drive this, we really want to think about, improved nutrient permitting, nutrient reduction incentives, and pay for performance nutrient reductions. These are things where, along with adaptive management, these are things that facilitate nutrient removal in a cost efficient and sensible way, right? And then integrated planning, I want to touch on that real quick before I move on. Integrated planning is another important one too, because that speaks to how to balance competing interests with limited resources. So with integrated planning, a municipality is able to come up with a plan to prioritize what capital projects should be, the order of capital projects, and then identify funding sources to address several issues in a sustainable way. So when we talk about partnerships, we really want to think about how do we strengthen partnerships. And in order to do this, we identified barriers to effective partnerships and then key success factors for successful partnerships, right? So if we think about barriers, you're talking about undefined roles and responsibilities. I know I'm going to get to this in a little bit. I was really involved in the Delaware Estuary Water Quality Improvement Partnership, or DQIP, because every project or partnership needs a really good acronym to go with it, so it's key. And there we struggled with this in our first year because we were trying to do things and trying to put out messages to the community, but the roles wasn't well defined. So it was hard to put out a press release that said DQIP on the bottom, because what is DQIP, right? So that kind of definition is really important. Also, you need sustained participation. You can have disruption from non-participants. And then limited sustained funding, obviously an issue, and inadequate data compilation and dissemination. And then when we think about key success factors for partnerships, we're really thinking about leadership, collaboration catalyst, and proactive management. We'll talk a little bit about that in our case studies, which are next. So the two watersheds that we're going to focus on are San Francisco Bay and Delaware River. And so, sorry, can't see my notes. There we go. So for the San Francisco Bay, there was really 4 key pillars of this partnership. One is a watershed approach. So this was looking at the Bay Area's approach to nutrient management based on regional collaboration, which benefits the environment by developing the appropriate regulatory response. And I should say these kind of four pillars is what these organizations came up with. They came together, and this is a combination of utilities, which is BACWA, the Water Board, and then nonprofits as well. So Estuary Institute and San Francisco Baykeeper. The second pillar that they really wanted to stress was stakeholders. So keeping stakeholders in mind. They really believe that this is needed to maximize the effectiveness of a regulatory program. The third pillar is science. In the Bay Area, all the stakeholders agreed that a sound scientific basis for future regulatory decisions is essential. And then the fourth pillar was practical regulations, right? And so the result of this was a regional collaboration that led to a regulatory path that was both practical and protective, considering the current state of science and looking at the future of watershed benefits. So this is a little background on the Bay Area and this program. So limits were implemented. There was 2 rounds of watershed permits coming out of this program. And what they did is they did this really cool study where they looked at all of the dischargers to the Bay Area, and they determined they did a technical review of all of them and determined where the kind of low-hanging fruit was for nutrient removal. So it did a really good job of informing how to most efficiently remove nutrient loading from the bay. Historically, the bay was resistant to algal blooms due to high turbidity and strong mixing. However, hot weather and stagnant air conditions led to algae and then also algae that kind of I don't know if it was evolving or it was introduced where they have actually a flagellum, so they can actually swim around and overcome that mobility or mobility issues. Though that combination of things led to algal blooms. Then a couple winters in a row, there were high rain events and flooding in environmental justice communities. And so that kind of that balance of nutrient removal and wet weather events was really a key impact in this partnership. Challenges still remain. There was a bad algal bloom. I forget what it was. I think it was 2024. And that led to regulators feeling like they had to step in and crack down a little bit more and really reduce limits. But they are still, this partnership is still ongoing. And they do still collaborate to determine what those appropriate limits should be. Sorry, there we go. So this is kind of our 3 Ps report card. And this is kind of how you can look at nutrient management in different watersheds. So for the Bay Area practices, I mentioned they did this really good technical study looking at how best to remove nutrients from different wastewater facilities. There was also a really good bay-wide model that was done in collaboration with I think it was the Baykeeper that helped inform the impacts of those nutrient loading decreases. Then for policies, the initial 2 watershed permits were first of its kind, resulted in a menu of options for informed nutrient removal. However, the tentative 3rd watershed permit, adopted in 2024, challenges the agencies a little bit more to decrease nutrient loading. And then partnerships, this is kind of like the A+ version of what a partnership around nutrient removal can look like. and with collaboration between these different stakeholders. All right, so we're gonna come back to the East Coast, a little closer to home, um, and talk about the lower Delaware River, the Delaware Estuary. And so there's a lot of water quality challenges impacting the lower Delaware River. It's a very urbanized section of the river. You have Trenton, really the Delaware Estuary goes up to Trenton, and then as you go downstream, there's Philadelphia and the greater Philadelphia area. Across the river, there's Camden, New Jersey, and then further down is Wilmington. So it's very, very urbanized. And they really struggle with the big issue right now is dissolved oxygen. So a long time ago, I think it was in the 60s, the Delaware River Basin Commission was formed to improve dissolved oxygen and manage the Delaware River. It did work. They have since improved dissolved oxygen and allowed for fish species that are DO-sensitive, such as Atlantic shad and Atlantic sturgeon, to propagate in that area. And now they're looking to update the aquatic life designated use of that section of that river, which would lead to higher DO standards and really zero in on ammonia discharges from wastewater treatment plants. There's a whole history of regulatory history that goes back to 2017, where DRBC started to study how to solve this issue or address this issue. They were going through this study of, zeroing in on updated DO criteria, and one of the stakeholders in the area, the Delaware River Keeper Network, petitioned the EPA to step in and hurry the process along. The EPA did so, and then they actually were taking too long for the river keepers' liking as well. So I think they sued them as well. So kind of a little bit of a regulatory mess with some key stakeholders in the area. But what it's led to is now they have finalized the DO criteria and are moving into implementation planning with the Delaware River Basin Commission. The DUQIP, or the Delaware Estuary Water Quality Improvement Program, was formed in, I believe it was 2021, and is a group of 12 dischargers, or nine that are active, sorry. It's 12 facilities, but PWD has 3 of those. And these are their stated goals, really. They want to be the trusted municipal advocate for water quality in the region. They want to collaborate with regulatory agencies, foster membership relationships, and understand and evaluate and communicate the water quality concerns, measure progress in the estuary, and promote a shared understanding of water quality science and facts. So that last one is a big key. There's a lot of discussion and disagreement about some of the science and facts that are driving this regulatory activity in the region. So this is the 3Ps report card for the Delaware Estuary. So if we think about practices, kind of a plus minus. So there has been ammonia load reduction in design at some utilities. This was in the form of side stream removal, so kind of removing concentrated loads of ammonia at the facilities. However, a lot of these have been paused because of the regulatory uncertainty around what their limits are going to be, and if they went through with these projects that are, $100 million in most cases, then they might have to turn around and make a significant investment for mainstream removal anyway. So that kind of regulatory ambiguity has kind of caused them to pull back on those projects. Policies, there has been a long history of improved DO in the Delaware Estuary. And so that's a positive. A negative is kind of EPA stepping in to speed things up and kind of interrupting that DRBC transparent process that was going on. And then partnerships, again, long history of partnerships in the region with there's a PCB coalition, and before DUQIP, there was a DO partnership with several utilities. DUQIP formed with 9 active utilities to share information and resources, still kind of getting their feet under them at this point. And then kind of a plus minus here, DRBC's water quality advisory committee meetings were included in the initial effort to update the DO criteria standard. However, that process was interrupted and they haven't been having those meetings as regularly anymore. So they've kind of cut out the stakeholders a little bit. This is my last slide. Just a plug that we're also doing a similar project, thinking about these 3 Ps and framework for One Water planning and program management, and that's WRF 5175, and then also WRF 5196. And with that, I'll take questions. I do on time. Okay. Answered all the questions. If you think of questions later, you can go look at the report and Control F your question. The long report. Yeah.
So, in practice,
Yeah.
most of the talk was on ammonia removal.
Mhm.
Is there like any consideration of ammonia recovery? Perhaps, but I heard there are a couple of research now that focuses on ammonia recovery and then recovers ammonia sulfate as fertilizer. Perhaps that could offset some of the costs. Cost is usually one of the those considerations. So it's recovery as part of the talk, but the focus is just
Yeah.
and
Yeah. No, it's
Repeat the question.
yes. Yeah. Sorry. So if I understand the correction or the question correctly, you're saying, for practices, do we consider things outside of mainstream treatment like ammonia and phosphorus recovery and side stream? Is that correct? Yeah, it's a really good point. And yes, that is part of the larger project and practices. I will say, I know, there's been a lot of facilities going to ammonia and phosphorus capture. I know some facilities are having an issue finding markets for like the phosphorus that they recover, which is kind of unfortunate. But it seems like, hopefully that market materializes a little bit more in the future. That answer your question? Yep.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Well, I thought that was a good intro to just maybe the national view of this. We're going to bring it back to New York State with the next 2 talks. But with a programmatic approach towards solving these issues. I think the next 2 talks are going to bring it down from these big utilities like San Francisco Bay and Delaware River down to not too little in either cases, but taking all those elements and taking it to what needs to be done. So our next talk, our next speaker is Justin Jobin. He's a senior manager of government relations with Infiltrator Water Technologies, where he advocates for responsible wastewater policy, advances science-based regulations, and fosters collaboration across industry stakeholders. Before joining Infiltrator, he served as environmental projects coordinator for Suffolk County, New York, at their Department of Health Services, helping lead efforts to address nitrogen pollution throughout the county's Reclaim Our Water initiative. Earlier in his career, he worked as an environmental science for the town of Jamestown, Rhode Island, focusing on watershed management and decentralized wastewater treatment systems. His combined public and private sector experience provides a balanced perspective on environmental policy and infrastructure challenges. outside of work. He enjoys the outdoors and spending time with his 3 dogs.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all. I am not one to stand still. If anybody here knows me, I'm not going to be standing still at all. So I'll be walking around. I'll try and speak loud enough to communicate to everyone without being stuck in a really small confined space. So thank you. That bio is a great example of don't rely on what AI can write, because it just randomly included a few really awkward, unnecessary sentences in there. So I'm talking about the evolution of management of wastewater on Long Island. First presentation showing what community larger scale systems can do, right? Long Island, you would think, and also we're barely in New York, right? Long Island, we'll get closer when we go to Lake George talk. Chris's talk after mine is called The Long Road. Mine was initially like the evolution of wastewater management, and we've heard a lot today. In the first session that I was at, they talked a lot about the reimagining or reinventing their revitalization plan. So it's like the revitalization of the revitalization plan, right? So there's a lot of stuff that we're doing. Everything that I'm talking about, we're probably not going to see measurable results from a watershed standpoint for 10 to 20 years. That's really just standard. And how the hell do you do that, right? Let's be blunt with the way the politics are. Every 4 years or something, things are changing and priorities are changing. Welcome to my world as a manager of government relations. This is what we do. I do want to introduce Otis. He is my service dog. I only really need him at night, but I have no place to bring him during the day. So he's very smart because he goes to a lot of conferences. And I will put him right here, and he will be available for pets and questions afterwards. So again, nobody wants to take responsibility for what I say, not even my 3 dogs. So this is my general disclaimer. Infiltrator, Water Technologies. This isn't Half Moon Education. I apologize for the typo in there. That's carried over from an old presentation. But Infiltrator, nor really anyone, Clarkson or here at the summit, wants any responsibility for what I say. So I'm covered. Those are my 3 dogs. He's the only one who travels. I hope to cover things today. This is a totally different color than what was on my initial PowerPoint, but that's fine. Just throwing me for a little shock here. So hopefully talk about and convey to you the problem, how we approached it. We actually got results. So talk about those lessons learned and recommendations and discussion moving forward. So Long Island, New York. Here's a really fun fact nobody thinks of. It's the most densely populated area of septic systems in the United States. And why is that? The mafia. Really, that's what it boils down to. Because in the late 60s, early 70s, they wanted to sewer. There were actually plans to sewer most of Long Island. There's actually sewer pipes in the ground for most of Long Island. But there was a whole bunch of political things and mafia kind of jockeying for contracts. Somebody ended up dead before a court testimony, and it just never happened. And it became this thing that nobody wanted to touch with a 10-foot pole. So for decades, they did not address the wastewater situation on Long Island. They dumped it into the ground, no treatment. Long Island is an island. It's a sole source aquifer. It's an EPA designated sole source aquifer. All the water that they consume, that we consume on the island, is from the aquifer under our feet. When you dump raw wastewater into it, you're going to be drinking some pretty bad stuff. So do that for 50 years, 40 years, you're going to have some problems, right? So I mentioned the most densely populated area of septic systems. We all know Long Island combined with Queens and Manhattan is basically, it's the second most densely populated area in the country, second only to LA County. So we're talking one of the most densely populated areas in the country and the only densely populated unsewered area to this extent. So not great for water quality in Long Island, just being clear. 360,000 cesspools in Suffolk County. Suffolk County is the eastern end of Long Island, out the Hamptons all the way to the Nassau County border. Nassau County borders between Suffolk and Queens. Believe it or not, there's like 1,000 septic systems in Queens that nobody talks about. that maybe we'll catch on later and maybe there's a good policy, somebody from DEC will free up some money, hopefully, but it's just this hidden little section of Queens that nobody talks about. 40,000 septic systems in Nassau County. Nassau County is mostly sewer. However, the North Shore, contributing to Long Island Sound in Nassau County, has 40,000 septic systems. So the 10% that's unsewered is 90% unsewered. So just some numbers for you. Commercial systems, there's 40,000 in Suffolk County, 45,000. So throws that whole number in Suffolk County over 400,000. Figure another 5,000 in Nassau County. So we're talking 450, maybe 500,000, maybe 500,000 systems that there could be that had no wastewater treatment for decades. Throw on top of that, most people, when you think of a septic system, it's a septic tank. Most people don't think about septic systems, but I'm in a room of environmentalists, so hopefully some of you do. Septic tank, then some sort of leaching structure, typically a leaching field, right? It's a field. You're not just dumping water into the ground, except for on Long Island. They have permission from the state way back when to have these deep leaching structures, minimum of 12 foot. So these are concrete rings. They're 8 foot in diameter, 4 feet deep. They stack them on top of each other. You need 12 feet. Historically, raw sewage goes in there and the water builds up. And what happens when you get a lot of pressure of 8 foot diameter of 12 foot of wastewater? No matter how bad, that weight of the water is it becomes like a needle. You're creating injection wells of, I'll be nice, wastewater into the ground, into the sand, into your aquifer, your sole source aquifer, your drinking water, right? So now the cost of contaminating the water, you now have to treat it, and you're running into problems. And guess what? There's stuff in our wastewater that we can't treat really easily. There's stuff that we didn't have in the last 10 years. There's stuff we can measure now that we didn't have the ability to cheaply measure 10 years ago. And that's probably some of the conversations that's going on in the other group over there. So, but with PFAS and all of those other contaminants, there's pharmaceuticals. We're just measuring pharmaceuticals now. We're learning that the soil, not deep soil, but the top, say 30 inches of your soil horizon can remove a lot of the contaminants of wastewater and break down those pharmaceuticals. But we can't measure what we're breaking the pharmaceuticals down into. So what if they start breaking down to small chemicals that start merging with other chemicals, other contaminants that we're breaking down? There could be issues there. So there's a whole mass of unintended consequences of what happened on Long Island. Everybody here knows harmful algal blooms, right? Saltwater, marine water, fueled by nitrogen. Fresh water is fueled by phosphorus. Blue-green algae for fresh water. Red tide, brown tide, PSP, you have paralytic shellfish poisoning. A lot of interesting things happen. You hear Florida, there's a lot of red tide. Really, the most times you hear about harmful algal blooms is really in this area, because blue-green algae is toxic to pets, and God forbid little Otis here at 7.5 pounds drinks a little bit of out of a lake that's experiencing a blue-green algal bloom, and that his liver is toast. He could be dead in moments or days. So there's a lot of, if you remember a few years ago, a dog died drinking water in Central Park from blue-green algal bloom. That got a ton of press. On Long Island, a lot of you have brown tide on the South Shore. It looks like you're fishing in a bay of coffee, right? And that's okay. What really gets noticed in the press is when they have the turtle die off or fish kills. That gets it. But fishing in brown water, it's disgusting. You think people would act. But they did. We did eventually. All right. Thanks to Nature Conservancy in Stony Brook, they produced this map of rainbow of toxic algae every year. This is the 2024. I wasn't able to grab the 2025 map. It's actually something to note. There's an area with not as much stuff going on, and that is where the South Shore, the sewer district is. So that's where the Bergen Point plant is. So we actually see less harmful algal blooms there because it's sewered. All right, so we have to study the problem, and Long Island spent a lot of money studying the problem in Suffolk County and Nassau County. And where is this coming from? So in a lot of areas, you have these similar maps, and it shows the nitrogen loading is coming from mainly either agriculture or other sources. The septic sources here are 50%, if not more, 50 to 60% of the nitrogen loading. So this is a serious problem. Fertilizer, which is really interesting because Long Island uses most of the fertilizer manufactured in the US is consumed and used on Long Island. So they're using a ton of fertilizer. That's still a big number. They have to do something with the fertilizer. They need to go to slow release fertilizer for sure. And other things. Sewage treatment plants, 25% in Hempstead Harbor, Cold Spring Harbor, much less. So, but the septic systems are consistent across the board. So active treatment, advanced treatment, what we call on the island of IAOWTS stands for Innovative Advanced On-Site Wastewater Treatment Systems, or we couldn't come up with a simple name. I call them nitrogen reducing septic systems. It's easier that way. So again, you have a septic tank. In some cases, sometimes straight wastewater into a leaching pool. That's the conventional way to do it on Long Island. Currently, we're migrating towards the advanced treatment where there's a component here, a biological component that mimics the nitrogen cycle and removes 70% of the nitrogen inside the system. So again, you're adding nitrogen into your sole source aquifer, you're increasing nitrogen in your drinking water on top of having all of the nitrogen in the wastewater making its way out to your bays and surface water. So there's many environmental issues going on here. Over the last 10 years, we've taken a 5-pronged approach. So we had to develop the capacity, and really this 5-pronged approach was set into motion when the county executive at the time assembled a team and they did what they called their magical septic tour. And they went to 5 states in 4 days, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Delaware, Maryland, somewhere else they went. Anyway, but came up with a lot of recommendations. So they wanted to go and improve on the existing, on what other areas that have actually tackled this problem, what have they done, how can we make it better? So we need to develop the capacity to evaluate, approve, and regulate these technologies. This is like a foreign technology for the regulators, so you had to address that issue. Then you had to train everybody, train the industry, train the public, educate the public outreach. You have to train the regulators who are going to be evaluating these plans. They don't know what they're looking at. Have to update outdated documents and regulations, all the code, all the guidance memos, all the stuff that says you can't do this because we've never done this before now needs to change to say we are going to do something better. We need to promote, this number 4 is actually wrong. We need to identify the priority areas. We need to study the nitrogen loading, identify priority areas, and then finally, you need the money. Without the money, we can't really do much of anything. So just taking a quick look, regulatory jurisdiction in New York for advanced treatment. So if you have advanced treatment systems, New York State likes to see you have a program that obviously defines your goals and responsibilities, but really addresses these systems as a don't just bury and forget about, right? You need to maintain them. They need active maintenance contracts. They need some sort of responsible management entity or RME. So Suffolk County and Nassau County are acting as the responsible management entity. It allows them to require maintenance contracts. They added clauses in there that has renewals and reporting, and to make sure the systems are working, they put all that stuff in place. But really, Suffolk County is easier. The county has the full jurisdiction of overall permits, whereas in Nassau County Department of Health only has jurisdiction over new developments or subdivisions of 5 lots or more. Everything else goes to the individual towns and villages. There are 40 individual towns and villages. So each town and village could have their own set of regulations and rules. how do you make something happen? Well, we teamed up with the Soil and Water Conservation District, similar to other areas and what you'll hear about next. And working with them, they acted as the RME on behalf of the county. And they gave general guidelines. Towns could do what they want with it, but guess what? The DEC gave them money, the county gave them money, they're giving homeowners money to put in the systems, and it worked. So looking at, there's various technologies. When we started this system, we wanted to look at all the various technologies. We looked at 16 different technologies, 6 made it. 6 were actually performing to the level of nitrogen that we needed, which is 19 milligrams per liter, is what we need to meet the nitrogen reduction goals. The county set out and said, we want to see these in a lifetime. We want to see measurable goals, measurable reductions in our lifetime. So 20 years, we need to see something. In order to do that, we need to treat to at least 19 milligrams per liter, which is approximately a 70% reduction in total nitrogen from conventional wastewater systems. So here's a snapshot of some of the technologies. I'm not going to bore you with this. As you can probably tell, I could talk for like days on each of these technologies. All right, so another prong in that 5-pronged approach. You got to get the word out there. You have to talk to homeowners. You have to talk to the industry, have training. We implemented continuing education for the service providers, a lot of public education sessions. And again, thanks to TNC, North Shore Land Alliance, we have maps on where the priority areas are. If you were to focus in those areas, you can measure the impact. So a lot of these, it shows that in the dark red is 60% of the nitrogen concentration is due to septic systems. So again, I kind of a slide here that just reiterates the previous slide, but all of the plans that were put into effect can be leveraged. They're all consistent with the 9 elements plan, EPA's 9 elements plan. A lot of counties are working on that. They're also consistent with the Long Island Nitrogen Action Plan, which is now the Long Island Watershed Program. So by having all of these, you can leverage. So Long Island had, Nassau County in general has $14 million of the required 40 million. They recently received another, I think, 5 million on top of that. Suffolk County has received over $100 million. So lots of money out there, and by having it in a plan and carrying out your plan, you can leverage federal, state funds that can, again, at an earlier discussion, I think it was in the first session, someone had mentioned they received $2 million, and that's great. It's a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money. They were able to leverage that $2 million into like $90 million. So it just takes somebody, if you can get the money going, you can leverage the money into other opportunities. So again, there's a lot of money on Long Island and Suffolk County. Homeowners are getting up to $45,000 to replace their system. The money is not paid directly to the homeowner. The money is paid to the contractor on behalf of the homeowner. So there's this little loophole. There's also a political thing where the IRS was trying to tax the money, even though it was paid for, most of it, through a sales tax increase or a sales tax revenue. So long story short, this is back when Zeldin was still a rep, and we worked with Zeldin's office and Schumer's office and Swazi's office, and we're able to get that reversed. And now Swazi just introduced a bill in the last month or two that's going to codify this for all the United States, which would be fantastic. So any grants that go to upgrading wastewater treatment systems would be exempt from federal taxes or homeowners' taxable income. All right, so this has been a 10-year, I'm not going to go through each of these. Kind of not that short on time, but you don't want to hear me go through each of these. But we kicked off the program in 2014. Really had to work with all the project partners. I didn't talk that much about the different, the Clean Water Coalition on Long Island, Nature Conservancy, Citizens Campaign for the Environment. But without those groups, working with the counties, working with the individual towns, and working with DEC, none of this would have happened. DEC was fantastic. They were able to provide a big chunk of money to get this going. But if you did not have the leadership from the county, nothing would have happened. So we evaluated technologies, we changed the laws, we implemented financial incentives, and then completed the sub-watersheds plan, which is the priority area, started to initiate a long-term funding program. That's in 2017, and then built the framework for long-term funding. Started with mandates now. Now that these systems work, that we proved that we have some money in place, they started to mandate them in certain towns, in certain areas. If you're doing work on your house, then if you're adding a bedroom, you need to upgrade to an advanced treatment system. Finally, in 2024, there was a referendum in Suffolk to establish a long-term revenue stream. It added an eighth of a penny to the sales tax. It created almost $6 billion over this 20-year program, right? It's going to create $6 billion. They've already starting to tap into that. They're increasing their grants by $5,000 each this year with that revenue. All right, and the systems work. Suffolk County has some of the most stringent standards at 19 milligrams per liter. They actually sample and monitor the systems, and they're all performing really, really well under that. All right, so go through this fairly quickly here. But program success, without the county executive, you wouldn't have been able to do this. You need leadership from the top down, and you need significant county, state, and town investment, or at least time investment. If you don't have a leader who's really into this, you need a leader who can pretend he's really into this. You need to go into this with that goal, that aggressive goal that I mentioned earlier of we want to see results in our lifetime. That really, without an accelerated goal, you wouldn't get anywhere. The other thing is the on-site wastewater industry for advanced treatment was kind of stagnant. It was fairly stale. I started working in this industry back in '99, and we did a big project. There was a lot of innovation from '99 to 2017, not a ton of innovation. When this program started to kick off, we started to see international companies get involved. US companies making agreements, licensing technology, starting up R&D programs. And it really started to rejuvenate and reignite the industry. So I give the county a lot of credit for how they handled that. Again, I mentioned the most stringent technical evaluation process. It's good and bad. It's highlighted on here in bold because it's good and bad. They created a really stringent process to get in. They wanted to assure that the technologies that public taxpayer dollars are going to are actually going to do what we want them to do. Problem is you set a really stringent process and it stopped any new innovation from getting into the market. Because if you're going to spend $1 million to get your product into the market and then your product takes off, there's zero incentive for you to spend another $1 million to innovate a better mousetrap, right? It's not going to happen. So that's one of the lessons learned that I'll talk about in a minute. It meets the New York State definition of responsible management entity. That's really important because by doing that, you can also get smaller footprints for the leaching, but you're also forcing management of these systems. So again, it's management at the homeowner level, it's management from the county level, it's adaptive management on the regulation level and the priority area level. So constantly studying and measuring water quality impacts. Skip through some of this. Again, you want a plan that aligns with other plans, and you want that to come together and form a master plan that can be leveraged to get you more money. Increased public awareness is huge. You want to jumpstart getting early initial money through the New York State Septic System Replacement Program was huge. And then there was a study that we did. It wasn't the greatest study, but it did show by looking at data from Rhode Island, Long Island, and Massachusetts that these nitrogen reducing systems have been linked up to 16% increase in property values. So now you have data that the real estate market can now have tangible evidence that these things are actually going to potentially help them, help realtors, help real estate agents do their job. That's typically a segment that's really sometimes difficult to work with. So going through this, between Suffolk County has to date probably around 3,000 systems installed from the latest numbers. 200 systems in Nassau County. And remember, Suffolk County has 300 and change thousand systems. Nassau County had 40,000 systems. So it's Suffolk's doing better. They have streamlined all their permitting. It's all cloud-based permitting, which makes it a lot easier. Took out a lot of the issues of getting a permit. It can, in the past, it would go on forever. You'd print paper copies, submit it, it could be reviewed. Now it's all, they can have 24-hour permitting in some cases using cloud. It cost $3 million, and it's probably one of the best things they did. So also construction changes, mandates for new construction. There's a lot of tangibles that came out of this project. But struggles and lessons learned. A lot of counties don't have the funds that Suffolk County had to start. DEC created the state septic system replacement program. It was 75 million. The first part of the program was 75 million statewide. Long Island got 70 million of that 75 million. So all you other counties here, which is everybody here, you get such a small amount of money, right? So Long Island, they made, it's the squeaky wheel, right? They complained, they made the noise and got the money. Not every county is going to have that. So that's where taking that $2 million and leveraging it to $90 million is going to be the most important thing. Also, I already mentioned this, but you don't want to disincent, you don't want to set such a process that cannot be flexible to allow new innovation into the marketplace. They did a great thing to let the best of the best into the market, but now the best of the best can't afford to get into the market. So that's counterintuitive. So in Nassau County, they're just not equipped to run a grant program. I have that as a lesson learned because that didn't stop them. They worked with the Soil Water Conservation District. Use these other it's a legally established entity under the county, or use your soil and water conservation districts, work with your local nature conservancy. Nature Conservancy was able to get a grant that helped with public education and outreach. Work with those groups. Multiple jurisdictions was a real pain, but again, using the Soil and Water Conservation District, we got through that. Still allows deep leaching structures. I wish I could convince them to use leach fields. The problem is the lots are too small. There's really no room to do any of that. Again, you have lots that were supposed to be sewered that were never sewered. Sewering's not really feasible. They can only increase sewers by like 5 or 10%. Again, today's climate, you may not get a lot of things passed, but I think if you look at Suffolk County, they had the legislation changed in 2024. They had 80% support to do this. This is a bipartisan issue. Nobody wants, and again, I harp back to the first session today because I did surveys, and consistent across the board was recreation use of your waterways. That number one on nobody wants to hurt their tourism dollars. If you're a homeowner and you live here, the one good thing that you have going, and it's not taxes, I'll tell you that, but it's being able to go do shellfishing, fishing, go out on the boat, get away from shut down. So recreation is huge. You want to protect that. It polled at 80%. They got the change through. So it may not matter what the political climate is if it's something that affects everybody like this. So four takeaways, if you forget everything, which is good, high probability, you forget everything I said, pay attention to these. Otis is done. He just got up and walked away. Top-down leadership is needed. Nothing's impossible. Massachusetts has been talking about doing this stuff for 30 years. They've done nothing. Start now. You can improve through adaptive management. Use the best available technology. Let it get better, but use the best available technology you have. Start now. Common sense solutions, streamlined processes can really help you avoid a really bad time. So again, $6 billion Suffolk passed in 2024, an eighth of a cent sales tax increase. Thank you. Sorry, I know that's a lot. I think that I left 30 seconds on the clock. So any questions? Yes.
Real quick, you had grants of $35,000 and $45,000. What's the system cost on the average?
So when we started the program, they were around 25,000, then lovely inflation. And I do warn you, a good piece of advice is you don't want to throw a ton of money at it because there's the possibility that you could just inflate the cost of the system. Right now, they're about $30,000. So the money available will be, the money available will pay for most of it. That 30,000 does not always count the engineering. The engineering can be 2,500 or so. So you're probably around 35,000. So most of these systems won't cost anything. Some will cost more, some will cost less. I mean, I have a whole nother presentation that goes into the whole details of the grant program. Talk afterwards. Feel free. My email's here, reach out and we will, he's hanging out right there. Yes. Sure.
Enforcement, these, maintenance.
Yes.
We have one.
That's the question I don't have a solution for. I've been trying this, I've been fighting the maintenance battle and reoccurring tracking enforcement for almost 30 years. And I'm at the point where I don't have a solution. Nobody has a solution, but I'm sick of people just kicking the can down the road. These systems are sold with 3 years of maintenance, 3-year warranty. After that, there's not much enforcement. Suffolk has a little bit better program. And parts of Rhode Island, they take them to small claims court and can charge the homeowner $100 if they don't comply. That seems to be 90% effective because nobody wants to take the time to go to small claims court. I don't like that idea. I don't like any of the ideas. I don't like any of the solutions, but that's maybe next year. That's a topic. That's a topic for down the road, and I hate kicking things down the road.
Why don't we wait until the very end, and then if people want to hang around after, we can take some more questions, and if people want to leave, they can leave. But we should keep on course. So yeah, that was a great bringing together some of the policy stuff into action. We're gonna bring that up from Long Island to Lake George. Chris Novinsky is our next speaker. He is the Lake George Waterkeeper, and which is in its 24th year. He works with the parent organization, which is the Lake George Association. Chris's program applies research, science, engineering principles, and compliance with existing laws for water quality protection, as well as protection initiatives such as low impact development, sustainable winter management, algae biomonitoring, and septic system management. Chris has been recognized as a Conservationist of the Year by the Adirondack Council and received the Lynn H. Enslow Memorial Award from the New York Water Environment Association, and has served on the government's Adirondack Road Salt Task Force, which is another interest of this organization here at the center. Chris is a licensed professional engineer and a graduate of SUNY ESF.
Back home. Well, thank you. I'd like to thank Jake and Justin for providing some of the background that I'll touch on as well. So I forgot, I had a really nice title, The Long Road to Management. I forgot it. So sorry, I put this one on, but all the pictures that you'll see are from Lake George and the situations that we're dealing with. So the agenda, I'll give you a little bit of a background, talk about septic systems around Lake George, our studies and how we move that forward, show you a really neat website that we created, safesepticsystems.org, regulations, and then some takeaways. And there you can obviously see a problem. You got a septic field, a distribution box, water is not draining out. That shows you that you have a failed system. So clearly one of the things that we use to educate people. So a little bit more background on me. I was here at ESF 42 years ago. Can you believe that? Came back, but I worked in professional consulting for 17 years on wastewater treatment plants, stormwater management, worked with real estate developers, and I realized I didn't want to do that. I wanted to protect our resources, not destroy them, alter them. So Pete Seeger was a mentor of mine, and really helped me find the direction I wanted to go. So as I say, I hopped from the dark side and worked to protect our waters, defend Lake George and its resources, work with the Lake George Association. It's the country's oldest lake association, 1885, actually, before the Adirondack Park was even initiated. And our mantra is we like to use science to solutions. We always start with the science, identify the problems, and move forward to resolve them. So hopefully most of you know where Lake George is. It's about 3 hours northeast of here. Largest lake, and you heard Charlie Driscoll this morning talk about Adirondack Park is the largest park in the continental United States. Lake George, largest lake in the largest park. So one of the reasons it's so special, it's also got a water quality classification standard of AA special. Means its primary use is for contact recreation, swimming, drinking, culinary water. So really the protection of the water is very important to us. Water clarity of 40 feet. I always say I'm kind of the spoiled child of water keepers. Many people are dealing with pipes and outfalls and they see green sludge coming out. I'm like, well, we can see 40 feet deep and we can drink our water, but it's sometimes the waters that are that clean that you're not seeing the impacts. And that's when it comes to non-point source pollution. And that's what we have on septic systems. So again, why is Lake George so important? 1700s, the main battles of the French and Indian War, American Revolution were fought on Lake George. So historical importance. The 19th century, the landscape art schools, the beauty of Lake George. That's why people are gravitated to there. So a lot of the paintings for Last of the Mohicans from there. And then we move into 20th century, 21st century tourism. That's what it is. We are home to a $2 billion tourist economy. The Sagamore Resort out on an island on the lake. Hundreds of thousands of people come up to enjoy the lake. Businesses rely on the lake's water quality for their money, for their revenue. So everything is tied to the water quality. And that's where we come in to protect that water quality, make sure that it stays as exceptional as it is. There's only 5 lakes in New York State that are AA special. So there's a reason to protect this. And that's why we focus on it. And that's why our organization focuses on it. So we work on road salt, we heard, we nutrient pollution, septic systems, stormwater, invasive species, climate change. But, you know, we're here for septic systems. So take a look at them in Lake George. So we don't have 500,000 systems. We have 6,000 within the Lake George Basin. We have 9 municipalities. We have 3 counties. So you can see each of those approach it a little different. So that's where we start having problems. 45% of these systems are in what is legally called the critical environmental area, a legal term under DEC and SEEKR, the State Environmental Quality Review Act. So within 500 feet of the shoreline of Lake George or 100 feet of streams tributary, we have 45% of those systems, and those are the ones that can have the greatest impact. The other thing that we have is the smallest state agency in New York State. The Lake George Park Commission actually can oversee the protection of waters in the lake. And as I said, science. We are very fortunate. We have partners with Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, the Darren Freshwater Institute, that we've provided funding for and worked with them since 1980, one of the largest data sets of any freshwater body in the country. This is some mapping of chlorophyll A, you know, the microscopic algae that grows in the water indicates the productiveness of a water body. Red is bad, green is good. So you can see where there are more septic systems down in the south end of the lake, we have the higher productivity levels. So that obviously is a concern, showing that we are having impacts and influence, and one of those were septic systems. Clearly, higher density of septic systems, greater impact. Again, letting the science lead the work to where we are going. So we knew we had stuff to do. We knew we had studies to do. So this has been studied for a long time, and you've heard that elsewhere. 1970s, 1980s, the environmental impact statement that was done for Lake George in the area. Now, Lake George, actually, the very southern part of our boundary is the southern part of the Great Lakes boundary. If you bring in Lake Champlain and the Great Lawrence or the St. Lawrence Seaway in there. So we are the very southern part of the 10 states standards and the Great Lakes Basin. So at one point they looked, well, we can just pipe everything down to Glens Falls. No, you can't, because you can't take water out of the Great Lakes Basin. So that was off. So then we wound up having to take a look at septic systems and municipal plants around the lake. There was a lot of studies by the Department of Health and the DEC on septic systems and their influence. Then there was a commission put together to form the Park Commission. Again, I talked about that. So the plan for the future of Lake George, 1987, they came up with about 200 points to address invasive species, stormwater, recreation, and on wastewater, they said we should have a 5-year rotating inspection and management program that is set up to check all the septic systems in Lake George. So they moved forward in 1991. They actually enabled that law, adopted it. 1992, the lawsuit came by some of the residents who said it was overburdened and that they actually did not take a look at the no alternative method, which they needed to do under seeker. So they threw those regulations out, and then everybody decided, well, we're not going to go there, and they let it go. So I wound up coming in 2002. We started seeing algae blooms coming around the lake. We knew there was a problem. You heard Justin before talk about the impacts of septic systems, what they can do with algae blooms, lead to cyanobacteria blooms. So this is a problem, and we knew that's what we do as water keepers. You listen to your water body, you listen to what's going on, and you take a look and you try to address that. So with that, we started again going back and doing the science. We worked with a group in one of those southern bays where you saw those higher levels of chlorophyll A. And we just started taking a look at what was actually permitted in that bay. Worked with residents, went to the town hall, pulled the permits and files, and in this small bay, Dunham's Bay, about 80 residents in the bay, we found out that there was 21 systems of all those systems there that were permitted. 14 were marginal, meaning they had a napkin in their town file and they circled where a septic system may be. 2/3 of them undocumented. Nobody had an idea what was there. So clearly that is a problem. The town board recognized that and they needed to act on that. And we'll touch on that in a little bit. So talking about the science. So we got into algae biomonitoring. When you take a water quality sample, that is what the water quality is at that particular moment. But but sometimes you may not actually have a constituent in there, an analyte that indicates a problem. So we actually thought, well, we're seeing all this algae growth. Let's study the algae. The algae's in there 24/7. They live in communities, and we started doing research, and we found that there's particular algae species that indicate organic pollution. There's some indices, the Palmer Pollution Index. And so we started looking at these, and we felt that this was starting to tell us a story. Yeah, that's me out there swimming, taking algae samples. It's a, you know, everybody says, oh, you got a great job, and I do. They're not there in middle of January when we're out chiseling through ice to get water samples. So we didn't have that picture there, but this actually showed that we could prove that there is indication of algae pollution. So we felt that this could be something we could use to help drive and provide justification for wastewater management. 2016-17 through a grant by the DEC to the town of Lake George, they wanted to try to develop a wastewater management system in the town of Lake George. Now, the town had stakeholder meetings, actually mailed a survey out to get feedback from their residents, but then they weren't sure what to do after that. And then they actually turned and asked me, well, Chris, you bug us all the time about doing the right thing. You've sued us a few times when we didn't do the right thing. Well, why don't you help us on this? So we said, yeah, we'll work with you on this grant. We'll develop a program and figure out how we can identify areas that may need wastewater management. So there was a survey you heard about referenced in an earlier session. We actually had 34% response. There was about 500 people that we mailed this out to. There was a little bit more aggressiveness, calling them up and following up. The 34 people responded. We wanted to know information about their systems, when they maintained them last, do they have records, things like that. So some of the things that we put together on this. So a septic system typically operate about 40 years, depending, as long as you maintain it, it's constructed properly. We found that about a third of those systems in the town actually were under the expected life expectancy. A third had exceeded that, but then a third, nobody, they had no idea how old their system was, which obviously is scary. On septic tanks, they're sized based on the number of bedrooms. 3 bedrooms, you have a 1,000-gallon tank. 4 bedrooms, 1,250, and so on. 20% of those tanks were undersized, so you're getting a reduced level of treatment. A third of the systems, nobody had an idea, which is an indicator of a problem because that means they're not pumping them. You should maintain your system every 3 months, so that's a problem. I'll never forget one quick story. This woman called me and she goes, Chris, I don't need to pump my tank. I've never had a problem. I've been here 50 years. And I said, well, you're probably the first person that I would go to look for a problem, because if you haven't maintained your system. You saw Justin talk about cesspools. Here's a shot of one. 20 systems, no information provided at all. Use of dry wells, we heard about that. And then we also started doing algae monitoring around there. And we were seeing that there was high indicators of nutrient trophic levels. So these were all indicators and justifications for a management system. So what were we going to do with all this data? So we figured that we would actually create a prioritization algorithm. We took 3 layers of GIS information. So site suitability, what works for a septic system? You need to have separation of groundwater and bedrock. You need good soils, the hydrologic conductivity, how quick the water goes through the soils, separations to your surface waters. What is that? The slopes, the steeper the slope, the less treatment that you will have, the quicker the water will go through. So we created a rating system, worked with some professional engineers, and we graded that. So red is bad, green tends to be good. So you could see where you've got soils that are not as good for septic systems, where there might be shallow depth of bedrock. These areas started popping up. Again, you can see, you're within that 100-foot separation, so that we're in areas of concern for prioritization. Then we created evaluation of all those systems. We evaluated all those systems, as I said, created a rating system on management, on the age of the system, on the components, whether they were sized properly, whether they had permits. And then we did algae monitoring along the shoreline. Again, where were those algae blooms? What were the levels of the trophic index? Were there indicators of high nutrients? And we overlaid that, and you can see now that we were having areas where homes and systems were pop up. You can see how they related to these areas where there was algae blooms with the crosshatch in red, higher trophic numbers, where it was just the diagonal, it wasn't as high, where it was orange, it was a lower level. So these started coming out and pointing out areas of prioritization. So we were able to produce a map to show the town. I'm sorry, there we go. Of areas in the town that there was high indicators that management was needed and that you should implement that program. Getting back, we talked to Dunham's Bay earlier. We actually worked with the town of Queensbury, took that data that we had again on the biomonitoring and set up a wastewater management district. We've heard of septic district or sewer districts where you go to centralized sewers. Well, this is decentralized. A lot of what Justin just had. My time's up? Shucks. So we established this. So for those homes in that district, and our organization actually provided matching grant funds to help these homeowners replace their systems. 33% of the systems in that bay, remember there was about 80 of them, were upgraded, many to those tertiary or enhanced treatment units that we saw in Justin's performance. This is a Fuji that's going in. Again, it's like a mini treatment plant where you'll have settling, you'll actually have anoxic conditions where you can treat the nitrates, and then you can get clarification and aeration and treat the BODs and others. So really, mini package plants, really good. And then we started doing some of our algae biomonitoring in the area. So what we found, this is a little snapshot. Systems pre-2000, their parcels are in red. Systems that were changed after the 2015 management district went in are in green. The blue check marks are where we saw a reduction in what we call the algae of concern, these indicators of trophic index. And the red exclamation point where we saw the trends going the other way. So here we were seeing decreases in the algae of concern where there were new systems being put in. We created a website, Too Precious to Waste, from fixing the financing. Again, go to that website. I'm not sure if I can get there here. I'm almost afraid to try. They said I could, but we better not try. But go. It's safesepticsystems.org. We actually created a guide to walk people through how a system works, what they need to inspect when they go through it, how to consult an engineer, the do's and don'ts that should go into a system. One of the cooler things that we worked with is we worked with a couple local lending institutions, banks, and actually got low and no interest loans for people to upgrade their systems. So please check that out. We also started working on regulations, property transfers. The town of Queensbury again. So anytime somebody, and this is a thing, you know, I was a professional engineer in the state for years in consulting. You do home inspections, you check everything but the septic system. You know, they're more worried about radon and not trying to minimize those impacts, but they don't check your septic system. So towns when properties were being transferred, needed to check those. So in the town of Queensbury, they found about 20% of those systems needed major repairs, replacements. 60% needed minor. Now, under $1,500, that means a cracked pipe or, you know, maybe their distribution box was a little out of line and weren't getting completely uniform distribution. The town of Bolton also implemented in 2019. And all the homes now along the lakes where they upgrade in Bolton require these enhanced treatment units. So again, we're seeing justification, people seeing the impacts to the water quality and where they needed improvements to be done. all this and all this work that we did, working with the municipalities, we were putting pressure the whole time on the Lake George Park Commission because they could, again, 9 towns, we had to go to 9 different towns to get this done, or we could go to one state agency and say, this is what you should do. That's what we started doing. Again, the lack of uniform standards, water quality protection. So they put together regulations in 2022, and they went into effect in 2023. They actually used our site suitability model to show that 80% of the systems within that critical environmental area around the lake were bound to cause some problems due to separation of groundwater or bedrock or setbacks. So we were very pleased that that went through. All properties now within 500 feet of the lakeshore, 100 feet of streams now are in a 5-year rotation for being inspected. So every 5 years, they're going to visit your home and inspect the system. That's approximately 25,000 systems, 500 a year. And they put 3 categories. You pass, you're substandard, meaning that, you know, you have to increase your septic tank size, or you've got a pipe or something that needs replaced, or that you're flat out failing, and then you have 6 months to repair. If you're substandard, you'll have that 5-year period to replace it before the next inspection. So what are the numbers there? Well, you can see about 40% have passed, about 22%, again, that range, 20 to 25% failing. That's what we're finding. And then that remainder of those substandard systems that need small or minor upgrades. So we're 3 years into the program, and that's the status where we are at. So in closing, it does take time. I always say you have to be consistent and persistent. So you take a look at what started in 1987 to 2010, established the need, the studies, monitoring, algae biomonitoring, bringing that in. 2012 to 15, working with the Dunham's Bay, the systems study, we got in the wastewater management district. The town of Lake George study, 16 to 18. Property transfer laws, towns start realizing what they need to do to upgrade that. 19 to 20, the education and outreach, our safesepticsystems.org. We were doing public meetings in every town across the lake to show them what the website could do, how they could help themselves. And then the Park Commission putting in the inspection law in 23. So some other takeaways, multifaceted approach. I mean, you need science, you need research, partner with the engineers, policy. You need to make friends with your elected officials. The failed septic systems were justified. I remember saying 20 years ago, you know, 25 to 30% of these systems are failing. And they're like, no way, Chris, there's no way that that's happening. Well, we're validated with that. And maintenance inspection are key. If you have a septic system, pump it out every 3 years. You're going to find out 90% about your system, if it's working or if you've got problems. And I always have to say, I didn't say this earlier. Everybody heard of Ridex and that they put it in, things clear up in your tank. Do not ever put Ridex in your tank. If you remember one thing from our talks, don't ever put Ridex in there. So with that, I'll take questions, and I guess we'll all take questions. Thank you. Well, Ridex says that it will take and remove it, you'll dissolve all the solids out of your septic tank, which settle all the sludge and solids. Well, what it does, it's an enzyme, and it really kind of floats them, and they leave your tank and they go out into your absorption field, and they'll wind up clogging your absorption field. So they do remove the solids from the tank, but not what you want. So I'm afraid of this one. Go ahead, AJ.
Well, there's a state septic replacement program, Since the
Yeah.
program started statewide, study missions that Long Island get gotten as funds. Thank the counties around Lake Jordan were successful as well. They all the fun. And I think we have about 56 counties statewide that are participating, but a lot of counties are not as efficient, right, at spending that money because the programs aren't as robust as what you see in Long Island. And a few other. From your perspective, what would you suggest as like the first place, to a county? Here's what you gotta do to really get started.
Yeah, and a question from AJ Smith, and I did have a reference when I didn't get to the website, so I apologize. DC's been a great partner with us. His question is, what is the first step for many of the counties that get the septic replacement funding? Is I would say work with the towns, try to see if you can get an idea on the information they have on permitting, on the age of the systems. Another thing is, that transfer law. So if towns can consider that, because those can give you quick numbers on, you saw it with the town of Queensbury, and the numbers are about the same. EPA said that. I'm sure my colleagues would agree. 25% of the systems are in failure right off the top. So I think those would be two quick things that I would suggest. It would take a little bit of legwork or handwork to go through all the files, but you can get a lot of information from there. I know towns don't always have the best record keeping, rural towns, we dealt with that, but that is also an indicator of a problem. So and then I would be glad to share this justification model, prioritization, because a lot of that is the GIS, and I'll share that with you, AJ. A lot of that's existing GIS layers that you can just simply get that information and find out, how quick the soils are, or how bad they are, what the depth of soil and bedrock is, and you get those justifications and you start building the case that way. Yes.
Could you just speak a little bit to maybe you've seen some observable, measurable changes in nutrient loading in the lake, like what kind of lag time there might be between starting program changes, and how you might verify reduced nutrient loading connected to septic systems and not to some other?
Yeah, the question is, how do we get, or can we justify or see reduction in nutrient loading? Lake George is not the best scenario for that because our phosphorus levels are really low. We're at 5 micrograms per liter, so we're really low. And that's one of the reasons that we feel that we had so much algae growth is it's like putting candy out there and the algae grubs it before we could grab water samples. So that's why we relied on the algae species and when we were seeing a change in that. So it's been a little difficult for us to actually prove that. But that's why it's been more of just the observations of the condition of the systems themselves. And we actually have tried to reach out to some homeowners, and people are not willing to say, I've got a bad septic system, come study me. So I'm not trying to be funny, but so we've done all that outreach. It's been tough for us on Lake George. So
have you seen reductions in algal blooms?
We have seen in those particular species, in those areas where there were, yes, and that one bay that we worked with, so we did, yes.
So these new septic systems cost 60 grand, and one has going to be cost up.
It can vary. We've seen systems, we've seen towns allow them just to replace the septic tank with an enhanced treatment unit, which they've been able to put in for about 16 to 20,000. The tank itself is around 8,000, and then the excavation tank removal, and it does require electric. But we've seen systems go up to 40,000 as well, depending on the amount of it. It's very low. I mean, it is, turning on lights is almost more energy than like a 1/4 horsepower compressor unit. So it's not much. There was one.
Can you speak to the property transfer law?
Mhm.
How was that received, and was there significant pushback from the real estate agent? Because you know, I think anytime you're tying one more condition into a permit, slow that down. How did you guys get them to not believe, did they, you just were
Well, you know, the town of Queensbury, again, they were pretty, we had a really good supervisor there that understood the importance of this and understood the importance of protecting our lakes. Working with the real estate agents, we educated, now that could just be a condition of the transfer or escrow accounts. So that's how we tried to work and educate with them. Yeah, yeah. Yes.
Overall, the expected longevity of leach field is about 30 to 40 years.
Mhm.
I'm working with Otsego Lake and we're trying to have 9-element plan. Is there any model, and it's for the entire room, that estimates the failure rate or the reduction in the effectiveness of the leach field over the years that we could use?
That's a longer. It's gonna take a little while to address that, but a standard inspection, you may not necessarily find that. Upon property transfer, you can do a flow test where you put in half of the design flow metered into the system. There's a biomat. Basically what happens is you need biology to treat the wastewater. And it builds up at the soil surface where the water to soil interface. And if it builds up too big, that's what causes the failure. So you have this layer of dead biology where other bones live and treat the wastewater. So you can essentially test how big that is by adding a certain amount of design flow into that over like an hour and see if it backs up or if it handles it. But that's expensive. That can be like several $100s to do. So there's really not a good way to do that. Preventative maintenance is the best thing that you can do. And I would say really today, since COVID, people's diets have significantly changed. I would say life expectancy is more 20 years of the system.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have one comment and one quick question. On the comment about the property tax transfer, we're in a very small town. And our town did put a law through about the property tax transfer, but there's no way to catch it until the deed is already to the new owner's name. So it's, and after the fact, you've got to fix yourself up, which doesn't seem to be the best way to do that. The other one was, the counties, when they do get the funding for their septic replacement, our county finally, after years of not qualified, but were restricted as to which areas they can grant the money from, and you have to be on the 303D
list, yeah.
And the list itself was so old, some of those areas didn't get that money anymore.
Yeah, the 303D list is, forgive me, AJ, if I'm, every 2 years that's supposed to be revisited and updated by DEC. So it should be, and they, you know, and they always advertise for public input. So if you know of a water body that is impaired for anything, I think you can submit. You know, you have to check the DEC EMB notice page, but every couple of years they reach out. Am I right, AJ, for 303D list data to be submitted and then to work with DEC? So so that's one thing but you are correct on that it's sometimes water bodies that have to be impaired. So
Yeah, there is a solicitation mechanism that happens in a couple of.
Yeah.
Much information. Septic replacement program. We hear exactly what you said, and that's been an issue. We're trying to figure out how to address the broader, more expansive